Hello, and welcome to this week's video on social justice. We're going to start out with an activity called Our News. We'll move on to another activity called My Universe of Obligation. We'll look at our reflection connections for this week and discuss the Change Agents video project with some important reminders for you. So as we get started, let's look at an activity called Our News. I need you to get out a piece of paper for this activity. You're just going to fold it in half to make a T-chart. Once you have your paper, your T-chart prepared, on the left-hand side of your T-chart, go ahead and title it Our News. And on the left-hand side of your T-chart, bullet 3 to 4 things that are happening in your life right now. I'll give you an example of what I mean. In my Our News T-chart, one of the most important things going on right now is the end of the semester. We're starting to wrap up. I can't believe we only have a couple more weeks and then we are done. So working really hard on keeping everything going and getting grades updated. Another really important thing taking place with me right now is a dance recital. My daughter is part of the Bates dance team, and their dance recital is this Friday. So every night this week she'll be rehearsing, working hard, getting prepared, and then they'll have a show Friday and Saturday, actually. It's also my cancer anniversary. I'm 5 years cancer-free. It's kind of a big deal, big milestone in my life. And finally, the MAT program. This is a master's degree program. It's a one-year program for people who have their bachelor's degrees, want to come back and get a degree in education. It's an online program, and I teach the first course in that program. We're in our fourth cohort, fourth year of that program, and I am going to have about 170 plus students in a 3-week course that starts immediately after this semester is done. So keeps me busy, but I really enjoy that class as I've enjoyed working with you. So now go ahead and take a minute to jot down some bullet points about things going on in your life. What's happening with you? What's kind of forefront in your mind for this week? After you've done that, we'll move on. You can go ahead and pause the video here, take time to finish your chart, and then let's continue. Okay, so now I want you to think about what you've learned about social justice. And on the right hand of the chart, go ahead and bullet 3 to 4 things you've learned about social justice from the articles, the reading, the peer responses you've done. Go ahead and just bullet. For example, social justice is, and what is your definition? And then go ahead and a couple more bullet points about social justice. Take a minute to do that. Pause the video here once again and complete the right hand side of your T-chart. Okay, now we're going to add a little bit more information to our right-hand side of the T-chart by watching a video. And as you watch the video, go ahead and add 3 to 4 more bullet points about things that stand out to you or new insights you gain about social justice. So let me get our video up and started. And here we go. I think you'll really enjoy this video. It's got some great information.
You and your team need to get things done. With Monday.com,
after
it's easy,
the
fun,
ads, of
and
course.
simple. Just add
All right, here we go. Here is our video. Enjoy.
Social justice. What do you think of? To me, social justice is a simple concept. It's the notion that all people in a society deserve fair and equitable rights, opportunities, and access to resources. But it's become controversial and nebulous because we've stopped talking about what working for social justice actually looks like. Working for social justice can look like this, or this. It can look like this, or it can look like this, or my favorite, it can look like that. Those are my students, and whenever I'm asked to articulate my work or my priorities as a teacher, I explain that I believe education can be a tool for social justice. But a few months ago, I logged on to Twitter, as I do, and I saw that a fellow teacher had taken issue with that belief. Teachers, he said, should not be social justice warriors because the purpose of education is to educate. And he ended his argument by saying, I teach my subject. But I reject that simplification because teachers don't just teach subjects, we teach people. When our students walk into our classrooms, they bring their identities with them. Everything they experience in our rooms is bound up in historical context, and so if we insist that education happens in a vacuum, we do our students a disservice. We teach them that education doesn't really matter because it's not relevant to what's happening all around them. And what's happening all around them? Well, racism, for one. In 2016, the University of Chicago released a report that revealed that, according to results of the implicit association test, fully 88% of white people harbored subconscious biases against Black people, believing them to be less intelligent, lazier, and more dangerous than whites. And that's just one concrete example of the insidious effects of historic and systemic racism on our country. For more evidence, we could look at incarceration rates. We could look at statistics on police violence against Black people. We could look at the opportunity gap in education. So, yeah, social justice belongs in our schools. Social justice should be a part of the mission of every school and every teacher in America if we want liberty and justice for all to be more than a slogan. Because schools are crucial places for children to become active citizens and to learn the skills and the tools that they need to change the world. So what are those skills? Okay, here's a secret. Many of the skills that people need to orchestrate the kinds of change that will lead to justice are already built into the work of schools. Things like problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration, perseverance, none of that should be revolutionary on its own. Combine that with the ability to understand history not as one static and objective narrative on which we all agree, but as a series of intertwined events about which there can be countless interpretations. If we deliberately choose to explore history with our students rather than just teach it, we help them understand that history is ongoing and that it's connected to current movements for justice. And we help them see themselves as potential players within a living history. So those are the skills I'm talking about when I say that education can be a place to help kids learn how to work for justice. But maybe the reason that my Twitter critic wasn't happy with that idea is because he doesn't agree with my definition of justice. Fair enough. Maybe he and I don't see eye to eye politically. But here's the thing. Our aim is to encourage students to articulate their own opinions, not to coerce them into agreeing with us. So it actually doesn't matter if he and I agree. What matters is that we're helping students have those conversations with each other. And that means that as adults, we need to learn how to become effective facilitators of our students' activism. We've got to help them learn how to have really tricky conversations. We have to expose them to different opinions. And we have to help them see how what they're learning in school connects to the world outside. So here's an example of that. Every year, my students study the history of apartheid in South Africa as a case study of injustice. Now, for those of you who don't know, apartheid was a brutally racist system, and the white-ruled government in South Africa imposed racist laws to oppress people of color, and if you resisted those laws, you risked jail time, violence, or death. And around the world, other countries' governments, including ours in the United States, hesitated to sanction South Africa because, well, we benefited from its resources. So in 1976, the South African government passed a new law, which required that all students in South Africa learn in the language Afrikaans, which was a white language. And many Black South Africans referred to that language as the language of the oppressor. So not surprisingly, students of color were outraged at this law. They already attended segregated schools with overcrowded classrooms, a lack of resources, and a frankly racist curriculum. And now they were being told to learn in a language neither they nor their teachers spoke. So on the morning of June 16th, 1976, thousands of kids from the township of Soweto walked out of schools, and they marched peacefully through the streets to protest the law. At an intersection, they met up with the police, and when the kids refused to turn back, the police officers set dogs on them, and then they opened fire. The Soweto uprising ended in tragedy. Apartheid itself didn't end until almost 20 years later. But the activism of those kids in Soweto profoundly changed the way the world viewed what was happening in South Africa. News outlets all around the world published this photo of 13-year-old Hector Peterson, who was one of the first people killed by police in Soweto. And it became nearly impossible to ignore the brutality of the apartheid regime. And in the months and the years that followed the Soweto uprising, more and more countries exerted political and economic pressure on the South African government to end apartheid. And it was largely due to the activism of those kids in Soweto. So every year my kids learn about this. And invariably, they start to draw connections between those kids in Soweto and themselves. And they start to ask themselves what kind of political power and agency they have. They ask themselves whether there would ever be a reason they would risk their lives so that a future generation could live in a more just world. And most profoundly for me, every single year they ask themselves whether adults will ever listen to their voices. A few years ago, my principal got an anonymous email from one of our students. It informed him that the following day, the students planned to walk out of school. This was in the wake of Michael Brown's death in Ferguson, Missouri, and the students were planning to join a walkout and march in support of the Black Lives Matter movement. So at this point, the staff at the school had a decision to make. Would we use our authority and our power to try to control the students and prevent them from leaving? Or would we support them as they put into practice the principles of social justice that we had taught them about since their 9th grade year? So the next morning, the kids left school en masse and they gathered on the lawn. And one of the seniors jumped up on a picnic table and went over safety expectations. And the younger kids took it very seriously. And as teachers and as staff, we told them, okay, be safe, and we watched as they marched off. The kids who chose to stay spent that afternoon in class. They debated the merits of protest. They talked about the history of the Black Lives Matter movement, and they went on with classes as scheduled. And those who chose to leave participated in a citywide student walkout and raised their collective voice for justice. But no matter where they chose to spend the afternoon, our kids learned valuable lessons that day. They learned that the adults in their lives would support them, even as we worried for their safety. And they learned that they didn't need us to tell them how or when or even why to protest. They learned that they were members of a community of young people with a shared vision of a more equitable society. And they learned that they had power within that society. They learned that events like the Soweto uprising are not ancient history, and they don't have to end in tragedy. And that's what education as a tool for social justice can look like. And here's the thing, our kids are ready for this kind of work. So in 2015, incoming college freshmen were surveyed, and 8.5% of them said that there was a very good chance they would participate in a protest sometime during their college career. And that might not seem very impressive, but consider the fact that it's the largest number of students to say that since 1967. And 75% of those kids said that helping other people who were having difficulty was a very important or essential goal for them. Again, the highest number of people to say that since the late 1960s. And research shows us that working for justice doesn't just follow from building all those skills I talked about earlier, it actually goes the other way too. So working for justice, engaging in activism, helps students build skills like leadership and critical thinking, and it correlates positively with their political participation and their civic engagement and their commitment to their communities later in life. So in other words, students are telling us that social justice matters to them. And researchers are telling us that it helps students learn. So now it's up to us to listen. And that might not be easy. In 1976, one of those kids who participated in Soweto in the uprising, he said that that event represented divorce between Black children and their families, because their families had grown up under apartheid and they knew how dangerous it was to speak out. They wanted their kids to lay low and stay safe. And when our kids threatened to walk out, a lot of the adults in our community were really conflicted too. Some of us worried that they might encounter violence. Other people worried that they would walk out, but they wouldn't really know why they were protesting. And some, including some students' families, were really angry that the school hadn't done more to prevent them from leaving. And all of those fears that adults have about getting this stuff wrong, all of those fears make total sense. But despite those fears, We've got to prove to our students that we will listen to their voices and that they do have the power to effect change. It's our responsibility to equip our students with the tools and the skills that they need to insist on a more equitable world. And then sometimes to get out of their way and let them apply those skills to things that they care about. And living up to that vision is going to require that we are flexible, and it's going to require that we're creative. It's going to require that we're brave enough to stand up in the face of people who try to silence or delegitimize dissenting voices. And hardest of all, it's going to require accepting the fact that sometimes we will be the ones our students will rebel against. Sometimes they're going to point out ways in which systems that we have created or in which we are complicit contribute to inequity. It's going to be uncomfortable and it's going to be painful as they push us to question our own assumptions and beliefs. But what if we change the way we think about rebellion in our kids? When our kids rebel, when they thoughtfully push back against our ideas or the way that we do things, what if we chose to see that as a sign that we're doing something right and that they're becoming liberated? I know it would be easier if their critical thinking skills manifested in more convenient ways. On their essays or their standardized tests, I get it, but convenience and justice do not often go hand in hand. And when our kids learn to think critically about the world around them, they become the kinds of engaged citizens who will recognize and question injustice when they see it and work to do something about it. Welcoming rebellion into our schools is going to require some rethinking about what teaching and learning look like. Because there's this misconception that if we give students any wiggle room, they're going to walk all over us, and classrooms and dinner tables will devolve into total chaos. And if we expect kids to sit silently and passively receive knowledge from us, then their voices will always feel overwhelming. But if we accept instead that learning is sometimes messy, that it requires opportunities to brainstorm and mess up and try again, that our kids dislike chaos and want to learn when they come to school, then we can set up schools to facilitate that kind of learning. So do me a favor and close your eyes for a second and imagine schools where teachers are thought partners, letting students grapple with complex, hard issues and not necessarily giving them the right answers. And imagine schools where we let students make choices. We trust them enough to do that. And we let them experience the consequences of those choices. Imagine schools where we let students be humans, with all of the messiness and the uncertainty that is bound to come with that. Whatever you just imagined, it's not mythical, it's not unrealistically idealistic, because teachers all over the country are already pushing the boundaries of what teaching and learning can look like with amazing results for kids. They're doing that in all kinds of schools, and there are countless models for teachers who want to get better at helping students learn in a way that's more authentic and engaging and empowering. I was reading a book recently. It's called The Students Are Watching. And it was by Ted and Nancy Sizer. And in that book, they said that the work of education is often described as a series of nouns, like respect, honesty, integrity. And they say those nouns sound really impressive, but often they fail to actually mean anything in practice. But verbs, they say, are active, no less demanding, but requiring constant engagement. Verbs are not structures, but rather engines. And so as I read that, I wondered, how do we make justice into an engine driving our work as teachers? What's the verb form of justice? I think there might be an answer to be found in the words of Cornel West, who famously said that justice is what love looks like in public. And all of my nerdy English teachers in the crowd know that love can be a noun and a verb. School has to be bigger. It has to mean more than I teach my subject. School has to be about teaching people to change the world for the better. If we believe that, then teaching will always be a political act. We can't be afraid of our students' power. Their power will help them make tomorrow better. But before they can do that, we have to give them chances to practice today. And that practice should start in our schools. Thank you very much.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. I find it very informative. I really like what she has to say about social justice. One of the things to think about is in this video, she's targeting high school students. That's who she works with. But how might you translate some of the things she said into your elementary school setting? Take a minute to think about that. What can we do as elementary teachers to become thought partners with our students, to actively engage them in considering issues outside themselves that stretch the curriculum, that challenge the curriculum? What can we do? Well, a couple of things I thought of is engaging our students in service learning projects. It's a great way to get them out into the community, to really be aware of what's going on outside themselves, even doing things like collecting food for food banks, something so that these children become aware of larger issues and really support these issues in ways that are appropriate for their age and grade level. So lots of ways you can do this and engage your students in social justice activities. So let's go ahead and we're going to now take this to another level where you can actually kind of get your kids thinking about this. And the activity is called My Universe of Obligation. And Helen Fine, a sociologist, defines this as people towards whom obligations are owed, to whom rules apply, and whose injuries call for amends. So let's take a look at what this might mean. When we consider our universe of obligation, and we ask in particular students to consider their universe of obligation, we have to think that kids are going to make many decisions day to day on whether or not to act on behalf of someone else, or where someone else falls in their universe of obligation. Some kids are closer to others, so they're going to say, yes, these kids follow my universe of obligation. Some are just acquaintances. They may say no. Some can be teammates. Some can be people on the bus. So it's all relative to each individual student and each of us as individuals. So let's kind of map this out and see what it looks like. Go ahead on the back of your T-chart, draw these 4 circles, concentrically bigger each circle. I'll give you a minute to do that. Don't worry about it being perfect, just get those circles on your paper. Now in the center circle, since this is your universal obligation, you're going to write the word me, because this is all about you. Now I want you to think about those people closest to you, those people for who you feel an obligation. In my case, it would be my husband, my daughter, my brothers and sisters, and my best friends. Those are closest to me. So take a minute to jot down for you, who is most close to you, who is most in your universe of obligation. Now I want you to think about those people who you kind of have an obligation towards, but maybe not as immediate as those in your first circle. So for me, those would be like aunts and uncles, cousins, friends that, not my best friends, but friends, colleagues, and of course my students. So now take a minute to write down who is in your second circle. People you care about, are invested in, but maybe not as much as those in the inner circle. Okay, now I want you to think about those kind of in your outer circle, those that you really aren't that invested in, but they're people you come into contact with, people who have meaning to you still. For example, these might be my neighbors. For me, I work with international students, so it might be those students. Cancer survivors, since I'm a cancer survivor. These are people in my outer circle. I may not have daily contact with them or as close contact with them, but they're still people that are part of my life. Okay, now you have your 3 levels or 3 universes of obligation, those closest to you, and then it goes out. So the question would be, when do we use our universe of obligation? Well, first we want students to consider their own circles of trust, actions, and biases. So who is in their inner circle and how do they take that out? We want them to better understand the choices people or characters have made. For students, when we read stories of upstanders, and I'll explain what that is in a minute, like people who decide to stand up and advocate for others no matter what the consequences, those are upstanders. So if we can read stories about that and kind of get students to think about how can they be an upstander and how would that impact their universal obligation. Also, when we read about times in history when an individual or group of people had the choice to act and about the implications of that choice. So when she talked about the apartheid in South Africa, this is an example about a time in history when a group of individuals actually decided to act. Even though it had horrible consequences, in the long run, it actually empowered a whole community and country. So let's take this to, again, like a more elementary level. And I'm going to have you listen to a story. As you listen to the story, I want you to consider how the character's universe of obligation shifts to a new interaction they have with someone whom they never met before. So what takes place in this story? Let's go ahead and pull it up. And again, think about the main character, and her universe of obligation.
Welcome to A Teacher Reads a Book. Kindness by Jacqueline Woodson. Illustrated by E.B. Lewis. That winter, snow fell on everything, turning the world a brilliant white. One morning, as we settled into our seats, the classroom door opened and the principal came in. She had a girl with her, and she said to us, "This is Maya." Maya looked down at the floor. I think I heard her whisper, "Hello." We all stared at her. Her coat was open, and the clothes beneath it looked old and ragged. Her shoes were spring shoes, not meant for the snow. A strap on one of them had broken. Our teacher, Ms. Albert, said, "Say good morning to our new student." But most of us were silent. The only empty seat was next to me. That's where our teacher put Maya. And on that first day, Maya turned to me and smiled. But I didn't smile back. I moved my chair, myself and my books, a little further away from her. When she looked my way, I turned to the window and stared out at the snow. And every day after that, when Maya came into the classroom, I looked away and didn't smile back. My best friends that year were Kendra and Sophie. At lunchtime, we walked around the schoolyard, our fingers laced together, whispering secrets into each other's ears. One day, while we were near the slide, Maya came over to us. She held open her hand to show us the shiny jacks and tiny red balls she'd gotten for her birthday. "It's a high bouncer," she said, but none of us wanted to play. So Maya played a game against herself. That afternoon, when we got back into the classroom, Maya whispered to me, "I bet you can't guess who the new Jacks champion of the world is." Behind me, Andrew whispered, "Chloe's got a new friend. Chloe's got a new friend." "She's not my friend," I whispered back. Weeks passed. Every day we whispered about Maya, laughing at her clothes, her shoes, the strange food she brought for lunch. Some days, Maya held out her hand to show us what she had brought to school. A deck of cards, pickup sticks, a small, tattered doll. Whenever she asked us to play, we said no. The days grew warmer and warmer. The pond thawed. Grass began growing where snow had once been. One day, Maya came to school wearing a pretty dress and fancy shoes. But the shoes and the dress looked like they'd belonged to another girl before Maya. "I have a new name for her," Kendra whispered. "Never knew. Everything she has came from a second-hand store." We all laughed. Maya stood by the fence. She was holding a jump rope, but did not come over to us to ask if we wanted to play. After a while, she folded it double, rolled the ends around each hand, and started jumping. She jumped around the whole schoolyard without stopping. She didn't look up once, just jumped, jumped, jumped. The next day, Maya's seat was empty. In the class that morning, we were talking about kindness. Ms. Albert had brought a big bowl into class and filled it with water. We all gathered around her desk and watched her drop a small stone into it. Tiny waves rippled out, away from the stone. "This is what kindness does," Ms. Albert said. "Each little thing we do goes out, like a ripple, into the world." Then Ms. Albert let us each drop a stone in as we told her what kind things we have done. Joseph had held the door for his grandmother. Kendra helped change her baby brother's diaper. Even mean old Andrew had done something. "I carried teacher's books up the stairs," he said, and Ms. Albert said it was true. I stood there, holding Ms. Albert's rock in my hand, silent. "Even small things count," Ms. Albert said gently, but I couldn't think of anything and passed the stone on. Maya didn't come to school the next day, or the day after that. Each morning I walked to school slowly, hoping this would be the day Maya returned and she'd look at me and smile. I promised myself this would be the day I smiled back. "Each kindness," Miss Albert had said, "makes the world a little bit better." But Maya's seat remained empty, and one day Miss Albert announced to the class that Maya wouldn't be coming back. "Her family had to move away," Ms. Albert said. Then she told us to take out our notebooks. It was time for spelling. That afternoon, I walked home alone. When I reached the pond, my throat filled with all the things I wished I had said to Maya. Each kindness I had never shown. I threw small stones into it, over and over, watching the way the water rippled out and away, out and away. Like each kindness, done and not done. Like every girl somewhere, holding a small gift out to someone, and that someone turning away from it. I watched the water ripple as the sun set through the maples, and the chance of a kindness with Maya became more and more forever gone.
I hope you enjoyed that story. I think it's a very powerful story. Really knows epitomize the importance of kindness. It really relates to this concept we've been talking about of the universe of obligation. So in this story, the main character realized that her universe of obligation, or can and should shift based on her interactions with others. Ahmed kind of calls this being an upstander. And upstanders are those active and informed human beings who will make thoughtful and brave choices in their own lives, in their communities, and in the world. So how did the main character in this story become an upstander? How did she understand that she needed to act with kindness, no matter who the person was, what they look like? How did she become an upstander, an active and informed human being? So we've kind of looked at this story and how our character became an upstander. Now I want you to think about yourself and how you might have been an upstander. So take a moment to close your eyes and think about a time when you were an upstander or when you helped someone. You don't have to share this memory. It's really just for you. So think about first when you were an upstander and then how maybe that shifted your universe of obligation. So take a couple minutes to do that. Pause the video here and think of an example. Okay, now if you thought of an example, hopefully you can kind of also connect it to your universe of obligation. I'm going to share a couple of examples with you to kind of give you an idea of what this would look like. So right now it's a very intense time of the semester. So my students who are usually in my outer circle are moving to my inner circle because they're taking priority and precedence. I really want to make sure I finish strong and give you guys hopefully some wonderful tools to take into your future classroom. So you've moved into my inner circle. My cousins I really don't have a lot of contact with, don't have daily interactions. They've kind of moved to my outer circle. But my aunts and uncles stayed where they are because they're kind of my main path to those cousins. But probably the most powerful example for me that happened this semester is the cancer survivor group I'm part of. When I first started this group, I met this amazing person named Aubrey who was suffering with all kinds of different cancer and different issues. We're a breast cancer survivor group, but she was part of our group just because of the nature of who she is and wanting to support her. So this last year, she was losing her battle with cancer and the other issues that were going on with her health. And she has 2 young children, both in elementary school. And it was just so hard to see her go from being this loving mother who's struggling just to hang on to be there for her children, ended up in hospice. And as a group, we decided we would meet at the hospice center with her. We have monthly meetings. And we all wanted to meet with her and be with her and kind of show her our support. And it's been 5 years since I'm cancer free, so I haven't had as much contact with the group, but I've known this person since the very beginning of when I started the group. So I attended the meeting and we just got to share stories about our experiences with her and what we really appreciate and love about her. And it was just so powerful to be part of that. So those cancer survivors just moved back into, a closer circle to me because of this experience. And it's something that I have to constantly remember and be really grateful for, that I am here. I'm with my children. And even though she is no longer with us, she has great support in her family, in her friends, and in this group for her children and her husband. So that's kind of an example of how there are ongoing shifts in our universal obligation. We can change depending on situations and circumstances. And getting students to think about these things and how things come in and out of our universe of obligation, I think is really important for us as future teachers. It goes back to that whole idea of getting to know the individual student and really supporting each individual in the classroom. So we're going to shift now our focus and talk a little about the Change Agent video project. I want to give you a couple of important reminders. First of all, you have one completed lesson plan is due April 27th. So please make sure to submit one plan for the group. So that's you and your partner, only one person needs to submit it. Make sure both names are on there though, so I know who the lesson plan's for. And I'll give you feedback on that lesson plan and kind of support you. Towards the end, let's jump to the third bullet. You have a lesson plan template in your course module folder. for the Change Agents video project. I've also put in there a sample exemplary lesson plan. So this is kind of the level of detail I'm looking for within your lessons. Please make sure you have that detail to get full credit for your lesson plan. Look at the exemplary lesson as your model. If we go back up to the second bullet, the release forms, I am updating scores for those. Make sure on all release forms, though, that you have both group members' names and the completed information on the bottom. If you only submitted the names the first time the release forms are due, go ahead and submit the completed release forms as soon as you have them. I've opened up the box, so make sure all completed release forms get submitted before the end of the semester. And finally, research references. First of all, I have provided by topic resources for you for your research. So if you're struggling to find information, you need websites or articles, just go into the folder titled Change Agent Video Project, resources by topic. Look for your topic, and you'll be able to pull up a Word doc that kind of gives you some good information and starting point for the research. A question that came up was, can interviews count towards the references? You have to have 8 total references for this project. Yes, they can count, which will mean you have 5 references and your 3 interviews, giving you the 8. However, if you go above the 5 references and you have maybe 3 more, so you originally had 8 references and weren't counting the interviews, I will give you extra credit for any references up to 3, so you can have a total of 11 references, 8 actual journals or articles, websites, and then 3 interviews if you want to do that. If not, you just need 5 and then your 3 interviews. If you have questions about that, please let me know. I know it's a little confusing, but main essence of this is that interviews can count towards your references. Finally, I know we talked about the number of lesson plans due. We did shift that for you. So we went from 5 to 4, I believe, for each group. If you have questions about that, let me know. I think this is going to be a very valuable project, something you'll learn a lot from. I'm excited by the interviews I've seen so far. If you haven't submitted your interview yet, please make sure to do that as well. And I will be in touch with you guys soon. I'm going to try and set up a video Zoom session for later this week or the first part of next week. I'll let you know via email. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know. Have a great week, and please make sure to watch the required course video for last week as well as this week if you haven't already done so. The Military Connected video was very valuable, and we had a guest presenter come, and I think you will enjoy it a lot. All right, have a great day. I'll talk to you guys soon.